My name is Emily Hartman. I'm 27 years old. And I found out my little sister had been living inside my name for 4 years while I sat in the third row of a graduation ceremony, clapping for her, thinking I was watching Brianna Hartman walk across that stage. I wasn't. I was watching myself get a diploma I never earned, for a degree I never took, under a name I'd spent my whole life building. The dean's voice came over the loudspeaker, crisp and proud. Emily Hartman. Bachelor of Science in Nursing. Magna cum laude. My own name. Called out to a stadium full of strangers. And my sister stood up in the cap and gown, walked across that stage in my shoes, in my skin, in my life, and shook the dean's hand like she'd earned every letter of it. I sat there with my hands still moving, clapping out of pure muscle memory, while my brain tried to catch up to what my ears had just heard. 4 years. She'd been Emily Hartman for 4 years, and nobody had thought to mention it to Emily Hartman. Welcome back to Calm Stories time, where the quiet ones finally get their say, and the loud ones finally answer for it. We tell stories about family, betrayal, and the long slow arithmetic of getting even the right way. If you've ever had somebody wear your name better than you got to wear it yourself, you already know where this is going. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, and make sure you subscribe, because what I did after that ceremony is the reason you're here. 2 years earlier, my biggest worry had been passing my CNA recertification exam on a Tuesday morning before my shift at Ridgeline Memorial. I was working as a certified nursing assistant in Millbrook, Ohio, a town where everybody's business gets passed around like a casserole dish nobody wants back. I'd wanted to be a nurse since I was 14 years old, since the night my grandmother's heart gave out on our kitchen floor and I held her hand until the ambulance came, useless and terrified and certain, right then, that I never wanted to feel that helpless again. I applied to Ashford University's nursing program the spring of my senior year of high school. I had the grades. A 3.9 unweighted. A 1420 on the SAT I'd taken twice to get right. 2 years of hospital volunteer hours logged in my own handwriting on forms my guidance counselor signed off on personally. I wrote my essay about my grandmother on the kitchen floor, and I rewrote it 4 times until it stopped sounding like a eulogy and started sounding like a promise. My sister Brianna was 2 years younger than me, and school was never her currency. She was smart in the way that gets you liked at parties and never gets you liked by report cards. C's mostly, AD in chemistry her sophomore year that our mother framed as a learning style issue rather than what it actually was, which was not studying. Brianna had charm instead of grades, and in our house, charm bought a lot of forgiveness. Our mother, Denise Hartman, worked as an administrative assistant in the counseling office at Millbrook High School for 11 years. She had access to student files, transcripts, testing records, the district's portal for uploading documents to college application systems. She knew that world the way my father knew the inside of a transmission. It never once occurred to me that being close to the machine meant she'd learned how to open it. My father, Robert Hartman, ran a small insurance office 2 towns over and mostly stayed out of what he called the women's business, which was his phrase for anything he didn't want to referee. He loved us both, I still believe that. He just loved easy more, and Brianna was easy, and I had never once in my life been easy. In April of my senior year, I got a thin envelope from Ashford University. Not the thick packet everybody talks about, the kind with a welcome folder and a lanyard. Just a single letter. We regret to inform you. My mother read it over my shoulder at the kitchen counter and put her hand flat on my back and said, "Well, honey, there's other schools." She said it fast, the way you say something you've already decided is fine before the other person has had a chance to decide it isn't. I cried in my bedroom that night with the door locked, and the next morning I enrolled in the CNA certificate program at the community college instead, because a person still has to eat, and grief doesn't pay hospital bills. I told myself I'd reapply somewhere else in a year or 2, once I'd saved up, once the sting wore off. I want you to hold on to that thin envelope, because it's going to matter enormously later, and it is the first lie in a stack of them that I didn't know I was standing on. Brianna, meanwhile, had graduated high school the following year with a 2.6 GPA and a transcript that any nursing program in the country would have laughed at and mailed back. She didn't apply anywhere that fall. My mother told relatives Brianna was taking a gap year to find herself, which in our family was code for "we don't have an answer yet, please stop asking at Thanksgiving." What actually happened, I learned much later, is that my mother went into the counseling office's record system on a Sunday afternoon when the building was empty and pulled my file. My transcript. My test scores. My essay, the one about my grandmother's heart giving out on the kitchen floor. She scanned every page. Then she opened a new application under my full legal name and my date of birth and my social security number, which she also had on file from the FAFSA paperwork I'd filed the year before, back when I still believed I was going to college. She submitted my application, my scores, my essay, my hospital volunteer hours, to Ashford University's nursing program for the following fall. Except the person she listed as the incoming student's local contact and emergency address wasn't me. It was Brianna, at our parents' house, using a slight variation, B. Hartman, on the housing forms, which nobody at a university processing 4,000 incoming freshmen ever double-checks against a photo. Here's the part that still turns my stomach even now. The acceptance came back that same spring, addressed to me, care of our house. My mother intercepted it from the mailbox before I ever saw a single page. I was living 40 minutes away by then, renting a room above a laundromat with 2 other CNAs, working double shifts to save for the associate's degree in nursing I was slowly, stubbornly building toward on my own timeline. I never got a phone call. I never got a form to sign. I got nothing, because there was nothing left for me to get. My acceptance had already been claimed. Brianna enrolled that August as a freshman at Ashford University, in the nursing program, under my name, with my transcript, my test scores, and my essay about our grandmother, which she'd apparently read enough times to recite the closing line of when a professor asked her about it in a seminar 2 years later. She told the professor it still made her cry every time. I imagine that's true. It should make anybody cry. It's not supposed to be somebody else's crying to do. The financial aid came through under my social security number too. Federal loans, subsidized and unsubsidized, for years' worth, co-signed in the system by my parents' address and my own legal identity, since I was listed as an independent student with a verified income from my CNA work, which actually helped her qualify for more aid than Brianna's real transcript and our family's real finances ever could have gotten on their own. My hard work didn't just get stolen for admission. It got stolen for money too, dollar for dollar, semester after semester, for 4 straight years. I want to be honest about something, because it matters to the rest of this story. During those 4 years, I asked about Brianna constantly. Every holiday, every Sunday call to my mother, I asked how Brianna was doing, what she was studying, if she liked her roommate. My mother always had an answer ready, vague and warm. "She's doing wonderful, honey. Really finding her stride." Brianna herself called me maybe 6 times a year, always short calls, always from a number I didn't recognize, always ending fast with some excuse about a study group or a shift at the campus coffee shop. I never once suspected anything, because why would I? Sisters drift. Especially sisters who lived 2 hours apart and were never especially close to begin with. What I didn't know, what nobody bothered to tell me, is that every official document Ashford University generated for 4 years, every transcript, every Dean's List notice, every financial aid disbursement letter, every enrollment verification, had my name printed at the top of it. Emily Hartman. Not Brianna's. Mine. My sister was living my academic life in real time while I lived my actual one, 3 counties away, completely in the dark, cleaning bedpans and memorizing dosage calculations on my lunch break so I could apply to nursing school properly, the honest way, the second time around. I want to pause the story here for a second and say something to anybody watching this who has a sibling with access to your paperwork, your social security number, your login information, anything. Check your credit report today. Not because you have to suspect everyone you love, but because paper doesn't ask permission before it gets used against you. It's the one thing I didn't do in time, and it's the reason 4 years of my life got quietly rewritten without my signature anywhere on the page. If this story is already making your stomach turn a little, Go ahead and hit subscribe now, because what I found in my own credit file is going to make it turn a lot more. By the time I was 24, I'd finished my associate's degree in nursing the long way, nights and weekends, and passed my boards on the first try. I was proud of that in a way I don't think people who take the easy road ever get to feel proud of anything. I'd started saving for a house, a modest little 3-bedroom on the edge of Millbrook I'd had my eye on for a year, close enough to my new job at Ridgeline Memorial that I could walk on nice days. I applied for a mortgage that January. The loan officer, a tired woman named Carol Enders who'd clearly seen every version of bad news a person can receive about their own finances, called me into her office instead of just mailing the denial letter, which in hindsight was a kindness I didn't appreciate until much later. "Ms. Hartman," she said, "I need to ask you about some outstanding federal student loan debt showing up under your Social Security number. About $81,000, current, in deferment status through a school called Ashford University." I remember laughing, actually laughing, because it sounded like a clerical error, the kind you clear up with one phone call and a fax number. "I never went to Ashford," I told her. "I've never taken out a student loan in my life. I paid for my associate's degree in cash, a semester at a time." Carol turned her monitor toward me so I could see it myself. Emily Marie Hartman. My date of birth. My Social Security number, the last 4 digits matching my own driver's license sitting right there on her desk. For years of loan disbursements, 2018 through 2022, all drawn against a degree in nursing from Ashford University, all showing full-time enrollment status every single semester. I sat in that office and felt the floor tilt a little, the way it does in a hospital hallway right before you realize a patient's numbers have gone somewhere they shouldn't have gone. Because I knew exactly one other person on this earth with Emily Hartman's paperwork running through her hands for 4 years, and it wasn't me. I didn't call my mother. I didn't call Brianna. I drove straight from that mortgage office to the Ashford University Registrar's building, 90 minutes down the interstate with my hands shaking on the wheel the whole way, because there are conversations you have on the phone and there are conversations you have in person, with your own driver's license held up next to whatever lie they've got on file, and this had officially become the second kind. The registrar's office at Ashford University was exactly what you'd picture. Beige walls, a line of tired students waiting for transcripts, a woman behind the counter named Patrice with reading glasses on a beaded chain who had clearly fielded every excuse a college student could invent. I asked to see my own academic record, showed my license, and watched her face do something I've come to recognize now as the particular expression of a person about to hand you a problem much bigger than the one you walked in with. "Ms. Hartman," she said slowly, "you graduated from our nursing program 2 years ago. Magna cum laude. Class of 2022. "I didn't," I said. "I've never set foot on this campus before today." She pulled the file. There it was, printed and official, my name at the top, my Social Security number in the corner, 4 years of coursework, clinical rotation sign-ins, a senior capstone project about pediatric cardiac care, and stapled behind all of it, a photocopy of a driver's license used for campus ID verification back in freshman orientation. My name. My date of birth. And a photograph of my sister's face smiling back at me from under a laminate seal, wearing an expression I recognized because I'd seen it on her since she was 6 years old, the one she made whenever she'd gotten away with something and was fairly sure she'd keep getting away with it. I asked Patrice, as calmly as a person can ask this question while their hands are shaking, how a student ID photo doesn't get flagged against the Social Security number attached to it when the face clearly doesn't match a driver's license photo already on file from the FAFSA submission. She told me the truth, which was worse than any excuse would have been. Nobody checks. Financial aid verifies numbers. Registrar verifies enrollment. Campus security verifies a photo matches a photo they took themselves at orientation. Nobody in that entire chain is required, or even really equipped, to notice that the 16-year-old file photo on a Social Security card doesn't match the 19-year-old standing at the photo booth claiming to be that same person, for years, and one very convenient hair color change later. There's also this, Patrice said, and pulled one more document. A change of address form, submitted the same week as orientation, moving all official correspondence from my old apartment above the laundromat to our parents' house on Larchmont Drive. Signed, Emily Hartman. The handwriting was round and even and pleasant, every letter behaving. I know my own signature. I've signed hundreds of medication charts in a hand that slants hard right and drags its tails, because a nurse writes fast and doesn't have time for pretty. This signature had never once been under time pressure. It had been practiced. I asked Patrice for copies of everything. Every semester's enrollment verification, every financial aid disbursement, the orientation ID photo, the change of address form, the diploma itself. She told me that would normally require a records request with processing time, and then she looked at me again, really looked, at a woman standing in front of her holding her own actual license next to a diploma she'd never earned, and she said, "Give me 20 minutes, and made the copies herself. I drove home that night with a manila folder on my passenger seat that weighed more than any single piece of paper has any right to weigh. I didn't cry until I got to my own driveway. Then I sat there for 40 minutes with the engine off, going through page after page of a life I'd never lived, printed under a name that had always, up until that exact moment, only ever belonged to me. I called my mother the next morning. I want to tell you I stayed calm, the way I'd been trained to stay calm delivering bad news to a family in a hospital hallway. I did not stay calm. I was at Ashford's registrar's office yesterday, I said. I have my transcript. My diploma. My financial aid history. 4 years of it. Mom, I graduated magna cum laude 2 years ago, and I have never once been on that campus. There was a silence on the line that told me everything before she said a single word, because an innocent mother says, "What are you talking about?" immediately, fast, confused. My mother said nothing for 6 full seconds. I counted them, the way I count a pulse. "Emily," she finally said, "your sister needed a chance. You already had a job. You were doing fine." I want you to sit with that sentence for a second, because it took me weeks to understand what it actually meant. My mother wasn't denying it. She was justifying it. She wasn't sorry. She was explaining, the way you'd explain giving the last slice of pie to the child who cried loudest, as if fairness were a finite resource that had simply run out before it reached me. "You used my social security number," I said. "You forged my signature. You submitted my transcript and my essay under Brianna's face at orientation. That's not, she needed a chance, Mom. That's federal fraud. That's identity theft. Do you understand that's a felony?" "Don't you dare," she said, her voice sharpening into the tone she used on us as kids right before a punishment got handed down, except now I was 31 and she had no punishment left that could touch me. "Your sister has a career now because of what you built. Are you really going to take that away from her out of spite?" Spite. That was the word she chose. Not theft. Not fraud. Spite, as if the crime had been committed by the person discovering it rather than the person committing it. I called Brianna directly that afternoon. She picked up on the second ring, which told me my mother had already warned her the call was coming. "Emily, I can explain," she started, before I'd said a single word. "You have 4 years to explain," I said. "Start with the loan officer who's been staring at $81,000 of debt under my social security number for the last hour, because I don't have that kind of time to give you." "It was never supposed to be a big deal," she said, and I could hear, even through the phone, that particular tone people use when they've rehearsed the sentence in the mirror. "You didn't even want to go anymore. You'd already given up on it." "I got rejected," I said. "There's a difference between giving up and being told no." "You weren't rejected," Brianna said, and her voice went very quiet, quiet in a way that told me the ground under this entire conversation was about to shift again. "Emily, you got in. Mom just redirected it." I stood in my kitchen holding the phone so hard my knuckles went white, because the thin envelope. The one my mother had read over my shoulder at the counter. "We regret to inform you." That envelope had never been the real one. My mother had intercepted the actual acceptance letter before it ever reached me and mailed me a rejection she'd typed up herself on the counseling office's letterhead, the same letterhead she had unrestricted access to every single day of her working life. I had spent 9 years believing I'd been rejected from my dream program. I had spent 9 years quietly, privately grieving a version of my life that had, in fact, been accepted, welcomed, waiting for me, and then handed instead to my sister like a coat she'd decided fit her better. I need to tell you what I did next, because I want you to understand this wasn't rage acting alone. This was a plan, built slowly, over about 6 weeks, with somebody whose entire job is making sure paper tells the truth even when people won't. Her name was Patricia Voss, an attorney who specialized in identity theft and education fraud cases, recommended to me by Carol, the loan officer, who'd apparently seen this exact situation more times than either of us wanted to admit out loud. Patricia's office smelled like coffee and printer toner, and she listened to my entire story without interrupting once, her pen moving the whole time, and when I finished she said the sentence that made me finally, fully, exhale for the first time in 6 weeks. This isn't a family disagreement, Ms. Hartman. This is aggravated identity theft, federal student aid fraud, and forgery, and every single one of those charges carries a paper trail your mother and sister built entirely themselves, which is, frankly, the best kind of case a lawyer can ask for. Patricia moved fast. First, she filed an identity theft report with the Federal Trade Commission and flagged my Social Security number with all 3 credit bureaus, freezing new activity immediately. Second, she sent a formal notice to Ashford University's Title IX and Academic Integrity Office along with the Department of Education's Office of Inspector General, since federal student aid fraud falls under their jurisdiction, not just the university's internal policies. Third, she filed a police report with the Millbrook Police Department, attaching the registrar's documents, the forged change of address form, and the mismatched ID photo as evidence. And then she told me the part one hadn't considered on my own. We could resolve the financial and legal side of this quietly, in about 6 months, through paperwork alone. No confrontation required. But you mentioned your sister's graduation is in 3 weeks. A degree obtained through identity fraud is subject to revocation the moment the institution is formally notified, and I'd strongly encourage you to let that notification land on the same day as the ceremony, not before it, and not after. Fraud performed for an audience, Ms. Hartman, tends to answer for itself a great deal faster than fraud filed quietly in a drawer. I sat with that advice for 2 days before I agreed to it, because the old habit in me, the one that thinks every disaster in every room is somehow mine to smooth over, kept whispering that I should just let the university handle it privately and spare everyone the public humiliation. Patricia looked at me evenly across her desk and said, "Your mother read your rejection letter over your shoulder and typed you a fake one on official letterhead the same week your acceptance arrived. There has already been an audience for the theft. There should be one for the truth too." She was right. I said yes. If you've ever had somebody rewrite your own life story and hand you the ending they thought you deserved, hit subscribe right now, because the graduation is coming, and I promise you this is the part you came here for. The plan itself was simple, almost boring, which Patricia told me was exactly the point. Fraud thrives on drama and dies on paperwork. We were not going to storm a stage. We were going to let institutional process do what institutional process does, on a timeline that happened to coincide with a very public ceremony my sister had already invited half our extended family to attend. Patricia's office formally submitted the identity theft complaint and supporting documentation to Ashford University's Academic Integrity Board 11 days before commencement, along with a request that any action taken regarding degree conferral be handled according to the university's standard procedures, whatever those turned out to be. She made no request for a public spectacle. She simply asked that the true owner of the identity in question, meaning me, be copied on all further correspondence, since I was, after all, the person whose diploma was actually about to be handed to someone else in front of 2,000 people. I got a call from the dean's office 4 days later. A careful, official voice, the kind trained specifically not to admit liability out loud, informed me that the university was reviewing an administrative matter related to student records and that they took such matters with the utmost seriousness. I asked directly whether that meant the degree conferral for Emily Hartman, class of 2022, for years prior, and the current graduating student using that identity, would be paused pending investigation. The voice on the phone told me, carefully, that a formal identity verification hold had in fact already been placed on the diploma issuance for the ceremony, effective that morning, pending resolution. Here's what nobody at the university told me, and what I only learned because I was sitting in that stadium myself: administrative holds and public ceremonies run on two completely different clocks. The registrar's office could freeze a diploma from being formally, legally conferred. Nobody had told the dean giving the commencement speech to stop reading names off the printed program that had gone to press 3 weeks earlier. I want to be honest with you about why I went to that ceremony at all, since Patricia hadn't asked me to, and legally there was no reason I needed to be there. My mother had called me the week before, her voice syrupy in a way I hadn't heard since I was a teenager being talked into forgiving something I shouldn't have. "Please come, Emily," she said. "For the family. Whatever's going on with the paperwork, you can sort that out after. Don't ruin your sister's day." I went because I needed, for my own sake, to see it with my own eyes before I let a lawyer's letter do the rest of the talking. I sat in the third row on the family side, next to my father, who patted my knee twice and said nothing, the way he always handled things he didn't want to referee. My mother sat on my other side in a new dress, already dabbing at her eyes before a single name had been called. The stadium was full, the way graduations always are, 2,000 folding chairs on the field and twice that many parents and grandparents in the stands, programs fanning faces against the June heat, a marching band warming up somewhere behind the stage. I'd been to plenty of hospital events in my life, but never anything like this, the specific electricity of a crowd that's about to watch somebody's whole future get handed to them in a cardboard tube. The dean gave her remarks. A student speaker talked about resilience and how far this graduating class had come, and I remember thinking, with a bitterness I'm not proud of, that resilience was an interesting word to use for a class that included at least one member who hadn't actually done any of the work being celebrated. Then the names started. Nursing program graduates came up in alphabetical order, and I watched the clock in my chest tick down the letters, H getting closer with every name called, my stomach tightening the way it does right before you deliver bad news to a family in a waiting room, that particular held breath before the world changes for somebody. "Emily Hartman," the dean announced. "Bachelor of Science in Nursing. Magna cum laude." My sister stood up 3 rows ahead of me, cap tassel swinging, and walked across that stage in a robe with my name stitched into the graduation program beside her photograph, a photograph of her own face, printed under my legal name, distributed to 2,000 strangers in a booklet they'd take home and keep in a drawer somewhere for the rest of their lives. She shook the dean's hand. She was handed an empty diploma folder, the actual conferred degree still on administrative hold, though nobody watching in the stands had any way of knowing that distinction. To every single person in that stadium, Emily Hartman had just graduated nursing school with honors. I sat there clapping out of pure reflex, the way your hands keep moving sometimes before your brain has caught up to what your eyes just watched. My mother, beside me, was sobbing, genuine tears, real ones, the kind that come from actually believing you've done a good thing. My father squeezed my knee a third time and said, "There she is," meaning Brianna, meaning the wrong sister, meaning a name that had never belonged to the person wearing it. I stood up in the middle of the applause. Not shouting. Not running. I simply stood, the way you stand when you've decided something and your body has caught up before your mind has fully finished the sentence, and I walked down the aisle toward the stage while 2,000 people were still clapping for somebody else's version of me. I want to be clear about something, because this matters to the rest of the story. I did not storm the stage. I did not scream. Patricia had drilled one instruction into me over and over in the weeks leading up to that day: let the paperwork speak, and only speak yourself when you have to correct a fact out loud, nothing more, nothing performative. I walked to the base of the stage steps, where a university event coordinator with a headset and a clipboard was managing the flow of graduates, and I said, calmly, the way I'd deliver a diagnosis, "I need to speak with the dean." My legal name was just called for a degree I did not earn, And there's an active identity verification hold on that diploma this morning. I have the documentation with me. The coordinator's face did the thing Patrice's face had done in the registrar's office weeks earlier, the specific look of someone realizing the problem in front of them is bigger than their headset can handle. She spoke into her microphone. 30 seconds later, the dean, mid-handshake with the next graduate in line, was quietly pulled aside by a man in a suit I hadn't seen before, and the ceremony did what large, well-rehearsed institutional ceremonies always do when something goes wrong. It kept moving on the surface, names continuing to be called, robes continuing to cross the stage, while underneath, in real time, somebody very important was being told there was a problem that could not wait until Monday. Brianna was still standing at the far side of the stage, diploma folder in hand, posing for a photograph with a professor, when the man in the suit approached her instead of returning to his seat. I watched from the base of the steps as her smile held for exactly 2 seconds after he started speaking, and then didn't. She looked out into the crowd and found me standing at the bottom of the stairs, my manila folder in my hand, my own driver's license clipped to the front of it the way Patricia had told me to carry it, always visible, always ready. And for one long moment, across an entire stadium of people still clapping for names that weren't hers, my sister looked at me the way you look at a door you always knew, somewhere underneath everything, was eventually going to open. The dean called for a brief pause in the ceremony, the kind universities are trained to execute so smoothly that most of the stadium assumed it was simply a scheduled break for water and shade. Brianna, my mother, my father, and I were escorted to a small conference room just off the stadium's administrative wing, along with the man in the suit, who turned out to be the university's associate general counsel, and, 5 minutes later, Patricia herself, who I hadn't even known was in the building until she walked through that door with her briefcase already open. "You brought a lawyer to my graduation," Brianna said, and there was real disbelief in her voice, as if I were the one who'd committed a crime by bringing documentation to a ceremony where documentation was, in fact, the entire problem. "You brought my identity to your graduation," I said. "I just brought proof of it." The Associate General Counsel, a careful man named Mr. Holloway, laid out what the university's investigation had already confirmed in the 11 days since Patricia's initial filing. The enrollment records for the student known internally as Emily Hartman, class of 2018 through 2022, showed a photo ID mismatch flagged in an internal audit years earlier and never followed up on, a change of address form with a signature inconsistent with the original FAFSA submission signature on file, and financial aid disbursements totaling just over $81,000 issued against a social security number belonging to a woman who had never once, according to Campus CardSwipe records, badged into a single building on that campus. "The diploma issued this morning was never formally conferred," Mr. Holloway said. "An administrative hold was placed on it prior to the ceremony. What was handed to your daughter on stage was an empty folder, per standard university protocol when a hold is active but a name remains on the printed program due to press deadlines." My mother made a small, wounded sound, the specific sound of a person who had believed, right up until that exact sentence, that all of this could still somehow be smoothed over with enough tears and enough insistence that family should protect family. "She has a job lined up," my mother said. "At Ridgeline Memorial's rival hospital, in the cardiac unit. It starts in 3 weeks. Emily, please. Whatever this costs, we'll pay it back. Just let the degree stand under her name and we'll fix the rest quietly." I looked at my mother, and I want you to understand something about that moment, because it is the exact moment I stopped being angry and became something colder and steadier instead. She wasn't asking me to forgive a mistake. She was asking me to let the theft finish, to let my sister keep the ending while I kept only the apology. "The degree isn't the only thing wearing my name," I said. "For 4 years, hospitals and licensing boards are going to check a nursing license against a social security number and a name, and if that license gets issued, it's issued to Emily Hartman, meaning me, on paper, forever, no matter who actually sat in those classes. I am not going to spend the rest of my career one phone call away from somebody discovering my nursing credential was built on forged clinical rotation sign-ins by a person who's never held an 4 bag in her life. That's not a family favor, Mom. That's a hazard to actual patients." Mr. Holloway confirmed, gently but plainly, that I was correct. A nursing degree obtained through identity fraud, if allowed to proceed to licensure, would in fact result in the state board issuing an RN license under my legal identity to a person who had never completed a single verified clinical hour under her own name or supervision. Given the patient safety implications specific to a healthcare credential, he said, the university's obligation to report the fraud to the state nursing board was not discretionary. It was mandatory. Brianna's face, up until that sentence, had still been holding on to something like defiance, the particular tilt of a person who believes the conversation is still, somehow, negotiable. When Mr. Holloway said the word mandatory, that tilt disappeared. I did the work, she said, quieter now. I sat through every class. I studied. I passed every exam myself. Maybe the paperwork got, I don't know, tangled somewhere at the start, but I earned this. You sat through classes admitted on my transcript, I said. You passed exams as a student who was never verified as who she actually was. You took out $81,000 of federal loans under my social security number, and you let me spend 4 years believing I'd been rejected from a program I'd actually gotten into, because Mom typed me a fake letter on the counseling office's letterhead. None of that is tangled paperwork, Brianna. That's a plan, executed for 4 straight years, with my name doing all the heavy lifting the entire time. My father, who had said almost nothing this entire conversation, finally spoke, and his voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. Denise, he said to my mother, not to either of us, you told me Emily knew. You told me both girls had worked it out between themselves years ago. My mother didn't answer him. She looked at her hands instead, and in that silence I understood something I hadn't fully let myself understand until that exact second. My father hadn't been complicit. He'd simply been lied to as thoroughly as I had, just from a different angle, kept comfortable and uninvolved by a wife who'd learned exactly which questions he'd never think to ask. Patricia stepped in at that point, her voice level, professional, the tone of a woman who has delivered this next sentence in exactly this kind of room more times than any of us wanted to imagine. Here's what happens next, procedurally, regardless of anything discussed in this room today. The university will formally revoke the diploma issuance and notify the Ohio Board of Nursing that the credential was obtained fraudulently. The Department of Education's Office of Inspector General will pursue recovery of the federal loan funds, and given the amount involved and the duration of the fraud, this case will very likely be referred for criminal prosecution under federal identity theft statutes, separate from any civil restitution my client pursues on her own behalf. None of that is negotiable in this room. What is still, to some degree, within your control, is how the family chooses to speak to law enforcement about the extent of everyone's involvement. If your family has ever tried to convince you that the theft was actually a gift, hit subscribe, because we're getting to the part where the paperwork finally answers for itself in front of everyone who mattered. The ceremony resumed roughly 20 minutes after it had paused, and university staff quietly informed families that administrative matters had been resolved and the remaining names would be called. What most of that stadium never learned, and never needed to, was that one name on that program had just been formally flagged for federal fraud investigation before the graduate wearing it had even made it back to her seat. We left through a side exit, the 4 of us and Patricia, past a hallway of framed photographs of past graduating classes, decades of names under glass, none of them borrowed. My mother tried one more time in the parking lot, her voice pitching into the register she'd used on us as children right before a punishment, the one meant to remind you who was still, supposedly, in charge. You are destroying this family over a piece of paper, she said. You destroyed this family the day you typed a fake rejection letter and mailed it to your own daughter, I said. I'm just the one who finally read the real one. Brianna didn't say anything else that day. She got into my parents' car, still in her cap and gown, the empty diploma folder sitting on her lap the entire drive home, and I found out later from Patricia that she cried the whole way, not for me, not for what she'd done, but because, in her own words to a cousin weeks afterward, everyone was staring. I understood, hearing that my sister had spent 4 years afraid of being caught and not one single day being sorry for what she'd taken. Over the following 3 months, the process unfolded almost exactly the way Patricia had described it in that conference room. The Ohio Board of Nursing formally denied licensure to the application filed under my Social Security number, flagging it permanently for fraud, which meant my actual name, my actual credential history, remained completely clean and untouched, since the fraudulent application was tied to Brianna's fingerprints and photograph at the state level rather than mine. The Department of Education opened a formal fraud investigation into the loan disbursements, and because the loans had been taken out entirely under my identity without my knowledge or consent, I was declared not liable for a single dollar of the $81,000, which was instead reclassified as fraudulently obtained funds subject to federal recovery directly from the person who'd actually used them. Brianna was charged with aggravated identity theft and federal student aid fraud. My mother was charged as a co-conspirator, given the documented evidence of the forged rejection letter, the falsified change of address form, and her admitted role in submitting the original application using my transcript and Social Security number without my knowledge. My father was never charged with anything, because there was never a shred of evidence he'd known, and I want to say clearly, because it matters, that watching him learn the truth alongside me in that conference room was one of the few moments in this entire story where I felt something other than anger. I felt sorry for him, the way you feel sorry for someone who's been lied to just as completely as you were, just for longer, and by someone he'd trusted with everything. Here's the ledger, because you've earned the numbers same as I did. Brianna took a plea agreement rather than go to trial, given how thoroughly documented the fraud was across 4 years of institutional paper trail. She received 3 years of probation, a mandatory restitution schedule tied to whatever portion of the loan funds could still be recovered from her, and, perhaps most permanently, a federal fraud conviction that will follow her on every background check for the rest of her life, in a country where nearly every job worth having runs one. My mother received a lighter sentence in terms of jail time, given her age and lack of prior record, but lost her position at Millbrook High School immediately once the district learned an employee had used her access to student and counseling records to forge documents and submit a fraudulent college application. She's currently barred from any employment involving access to student records or personally identifiable information, which, given that her entire career had been built inside exactly that kind of office, has left her starting over in her mid-50s in a way I don't think she ever imagined for herself. Ashford University, to its credit, formally cleared my academic file entirely, confirming in writing that the fraudulent enrollment had never been mine and posed no risk to any credential I might pursue there in the future, should I choose to. I did choose to, eventually, 9 months after the graduation, and I want you to sit with the strange justice of this next detail the way I still do. I was accepted into that same nursing program on my own merit, on a fresh application built from my actual current transcript and my actual current recommendation letters, 9 years after the original acceptance letter my mother had stolen out of my own mailbox. I start classes there this fall. I'll be 31 years old in a room full of 22-year-olds, and I have never once in my life looked forward to anything the way I look forward to walking across that same stage in 3 years, under my own name, having earned every single letter of it myself, in front of nobody who ever needs to explain a forged signature to a room full of strangers on my behalf. I don't talk to my mother much these days. She's called a handful of times, always circling around the same request, some version of "can't we just move past this as a family," as if the 4 years and the $81,000 and the forged letterhead were a disagreement about holiday plans rather than a felony conviction she's currently serving probation for. I've told her, and I meant it the way I mean everything now, carefully and only once, when the restitution is paid in full and there's real accountability instead of requests to move past it, we can talk about what a relationship looks like. Until then, the door stays exactly where it is. Brianna and I have spoken exactly twice since that graduation day, both times through her attorney's arranged mediation sessions required as part of her sentencing. The second time, she said something I think about more than I expected to. "I used to think you had it easier than me," she said. "You were always the one who just worked hard and it worked out. I didn't know how to be that person, so I guess I decided to just become you instead." I told her that working hard was never the easy version of anything, that it was the only version I ever had, and that becoming somebody else on paper doesn't teach you a single thing about becoming somebody better underneath it. If this story reminded you to check your own credit report, your own social security number's history, your own name on paper somewhere you haven't looked in years, take that as your sign to do it this week, while it's still easy to fix. Identity theft inside a family is the kind nobody warns you about, because we're taught to guard against strangers, not against the people who've had our documents sitting in a drawer since we were 17 years old. I kept one thing from that conference room, a copy of the original acceptance letter, the real one, the one my mother intercepted and never let me see for 9 years. Patricia obtained it from Ashford's archived records during discovery, printed on the same letterhead as the fake rejection, dated the same week, addressed to me at an apartment above a laundromat I hadn't lived in for 6 years by the time I finally got to read it. I keep it in a frame on my kitchen counter now, not because I need reminding of what was taken, but because I like looking at proof, every single morning, that I was chosen before anyone ever decided to unchoose me on my own behalf. My father and I are slowly rebuilding something. He calls every Sunday now, actual calls, not the brief check-ins he used to leave to my mother to handle. Last week he asked if he could come watch my white coat ceremony this fall, and when I said yes, he was quiet on the line for a second before he said, "I should have asked more questions a long time ago, kiddo. I'm asking them now. It's not everything. It's a start, and starts are the only thing any of us actually get to control." I think about that thin envelope more than I probably should, the one my mother handed me across the kitchen counter when I was 17 years old, the one that told me no when the truth had already told me yes. I spent 9 years building a life around a rejection that was never real, and here is what I've come to believe. The thing I want you to walk away from this story with more than any of the numbers or the charges or the courtroom details. Somebody else's lie about your worth is never actually the final word on it. It's just the first draft, and you were always allowed to write the ending yourself, on your own paper, in your own name, no matter how long it takes you to get back to the page. My father taught me, without ever meaning to, that the people who love you can still fail you completely by choosing comfort over honesty, and that forgiveness, when it eventually comes, has to be earned one true sentence at a time, not handed out because somebody's finally been caught. That's my story. 1 graduation, 1 stolen name, and 1 nursing degree I'm about to earn twice, the second time entirely on my own terms. If you've ever had someone in your family cross a line like this, tell me about it in the comments, because I read every single one of them. And if this story kept you here until the very end, do one more thing for me before you go. Hit subscribe, so the next time somebody wears a name they didn't earn, you're already here to watch them answer for it.